Well, good morning. All right. Who was not here yesterday that's here this morning? 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? I see 3. Nobody over here. Y'all did good. Thank you for taking care. Glad you're here today. I hope today will be a very beneficial day for you. I hope it will be an enjoyable day for you. You're going to, some of you will listen to us speak today. Is it 6 times? 5 times, something like that. 5 or 6 times? 5 times. 6 times. I thought it was 6. I don't want to hear myself speak 6 times. I sometimes tell my wife, I'm paid to talk. When I make a mistake, I'll say, I shouldn't make it, I'm paid to talk. And she'll say, yeah, but not by the word. So some people, it's early, isn't it?
We're praying for you, Dale.
Keep on. But thank you for your kindness last night, and for those of you who had questions, I appreciate it a great deal. I want to go ahead and tell you now what I'd like to do at lunch. We have an hour planned for lunch. And what I think would kind of be enjoyable to do at lunch is for you to I'd like for you to sit with someone that's not in your congregation. You can sit with others in your congregation. But after you finish eating lunch, I'd like for each congregation to kind of get together. If you're here by yourself, that might be hard, but it might be easier because you don't have to argue with anybody. But if you're with others, get with them and come up with a question together as a group and submit that question. The text number is on the screen. You can ask questions at any point, and we will try to deal with questions as we get them. I woke up at about 3:30 this morning, 3:20 this morning, and I started thinking about today and working and praying about it. And I reworked a couple of the lessons. Sorry, John. I sent them to John as soon as I finished reworking them. There's going to be some redundancy in some of what we say. I'm aware of that. But some of it's redundant because, the text says to remind them of certain things, and there's reasons why we need continual reminders, because some things are more vital than other things. We need to be reminded of them. So there will be some redundancy for that reason. The other thing is, this first lesson that we're going to present, if I remember how we did this back 9 months or so ago, 6 months or so ago, we sent about 20 topics to the leaders here, and they selected from those topics the ones that they wanted us to deal with. The lesson we're going to deal with right now is called Essential Conversations that elders should have. Essential Conversations. And it started as a lesson we presented at Connect Conference at Creve Hall in Nashville. And Jeff and I put it together because we started thinking about some of the challenges that we see between preachers and elders. And so it originated as essential conversations that elders and preachers ought to have. And we're going to present some on that in a little while. But then we morphed it for this occasion into some conversation that every eldership ought to have. John, we're talking about leadership, so I wanted this morning for you to spend a couple of minutes. You have spent your life training how to lead and studying how to lead, and your degrees are on leadership, and you now work with Lads to Leaders. And I want you to talk a little bit about, because just so you know, John does not work with the Jenkins Institute, so anything he says cannot be held against us. But
which totally gives me free reign here to say whatever.
Yeah,
I'm just
I also know how to kick you out. But when Jeff realized he couldn't come just a few weeks ago, just to give you a little more on that, the procedure he had. They demanded he have 4 days basically of total rest. And he said, I can either do it then in February, or the next time I have 4 days free is in August. That's how busy Jeff is. Jeff's life is crazy. I'm happy that he's so used by the Brotherhood. But he said, so I'd have to miss that. I said, well, I think you need to have this done before August because you're in a lot of pain. So he decided to have it done. And I asked him immediately, I said, is it all right if I invite somebody? And he said, yes. And I invited 20 guys, and finally John said yes.
That's what happens. Usually I always get to the bottom of the barrel.
John's the first person I ask. So John, I want you to take a minute or two, and since I'm using your time, I want you to take a minute or two and talk about Last Leaders. I don't want you to you're not here to sell Last Leaders, but I do want you to talk, because when we talk about training leaders, it is a program that is excellent when it comes to the training of leaders. So talk a little bit about it.
You know, one of the things and I mentioned this last night, you know, Titus 2 talks about that's part of what we do in the church, older men, older women, to teach the younger men, teach the younger women for the next generation. And a lot of good, genuine discussion goes into that in our churches and our elderships and our staff meetings and things like this. But a lot of times what I've run into is, yeah, we know we need to do that, but how? How do we do that? How do you do it in 2026? How do we do it with the competition of everything that we have going on, from ball to school things to work to family things? How do we find time? How do we do it? And it's like, okay, we know we need to do it, but we'll do it when we get around to it. Well, Lads to Leaders is kind of that round to it. It's a leadership training program, the oldest one in Churches of Christ. It was started in 1968. We're 58 years celebrating this year or whatever of doing it. And it started by, actually, I don't know if you know this, it was started in a small town in Warner Robins, Georgia. And what happened was, it was an FFA competition that was coming up in Atlanta. And the guys at the church asked the preacher, Jack Zorn at that time, could he help them with some speeches? And so he did. They go up to Atlanta and they win. Apparently they win everything in their divisions that they competed in. They come back, and the elders of the church there at Warner Robins said, why aren't we doing this in the church? And that began the birth of Lads to Leaders. And Jack's view was, we need to make leaders in the church 100%, but we need to make leaders in our communities, in our homes, in government, in our businesses, leaders that are godly.
There's a tendency to think about Lads Leaders. You think about song leaders and preachers.
Correct.
But the reality is it started as training leaders
in general. Because, and you and I were having this discussion this morning, you want to talk about keeping young people, and we'll have a discussion about this later. It starts at home. It starts with mom and dad. Of course, that's the number one indicator of children being faithful. But if you get them involved, I think I told you last night, I attribute to me one of the biggest things of being involved. Of course, my parents were faithful in church. We kept going. They got me involved at a young age. And the Hoover congregation outside of Birmingham did some research, and they found, this was about 10 years ago, they found that they were keeping 85% of their young people faithful in the church after graduation. Because after graduation, I don't know if you know this or not, but the numbers statistically aren't good. So
be careful.
Okay. Break it down for me.
So the study that came out several years ago said that 77, I think it was, percent of young people leave the church when they go to college. There are a couple of problems with that. And anytime you hear a statistical study, folks, anytime you hear, know who's doing the study, know what their agenda is. There are guys out there throwing numbers around right now about the church that are wrong, sinfully wrong. And boy, you want to get my dander up, that'll do it. Because I do research. We do more research than any other organization in the church. Okay? We do more than any other group out there. And we don't know the numbers because we can't be numbered because we're not a denomination. So for instance, Southern Baptist, we don't want to be a denomination. Southern Baptist, Monday morning at 11 a.m., they can tell you to the person how many people are in all their church, every Southern Baptist church in the world. They can tell what the contribution was total, and all of them added together. They can tell you how many statements of faith they had. They can tell me how they had Bible study. They can tell you all that, because in order to be a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, you have to send that information in by 10 o'clock Monday morning, or you can't be in that convention. They can tell you Monday morning at 11 o'clock. How many folks worshiped last Sunday in Church of Christ worldwide? We ain't got it. Nobody knows. My belief is that there are around 60,000 Churches of Christ in the world today. There are more Churches of Christ in the world today than any time in history. We are growing faster than any time in the history of the Lord's church. But there are guys out there saying we're dying, and they are making their money based on we're dying. So those same people take this study that says we're losing 77%. You know where that study came from? A study conducted by Josh McDowell and his organization. Josh McDowell is a Protestant, not a member of the church. So it's talking about Protestantism at large. That number does not reflect Church of Christ. For instance, that same group, Lifeway did a study, and they said that 67% of preachers would leave their pulpit today if they could replace the income they have because they're so dissatisfied with preaching. That's alarming. So I did a study in the church. You know what the number is in the church? Around 14%. You know what that means? Our guys aren't preaching for money. That's awesome. So what the reason I say that is what is reflected in the larger denominational world is not necessarily reflected in the church. So I'm sorry, I took you off space there for a minute.
Tell when Dale gets passionate about something here. He kind of leans forward like this. You can always tell. But no, and that's the thing. That's our challenge. We want to keep our kids faithful. We want to keep our kids growing up. Not that Lads Leaders is a foolproof method. Not that there's not challenges with it. But that's what it is. If you're interested, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Okay, essential conversations.
Let's get into this one.
Essential conversations. There are 10 of them we're going to talk to you about. Essential conversations that elders should have. If you don't have these conversations, the sooner you have them, the better, because some things are going to blow up at some point if you don't have these conversations. These are conversations that any time there's a change in the eldership, you need to go back and revisit them. You know, every eldership is different in some ways. Even in a congregation, if a man dies, it changes something in the eldership. If you add an elder or two, it changes something in the eldership. Well, the elders said this. Well, the elders need to go back and think and see if that's something they didn't say in 1943, and every eldership and that person basing on that, and not on what these elders want to do or want the church to be like or wants within the realm of what's in the gray matter that elders have authority in, that we can say, all right, here's what we're going to do as a congregation. Make sure that so these are conversations that every eldership. The first one, John?
First one is it's the unity conversation, Dale. Are we really unified as eldership? Now, I think we probably need to clear this up. Does that mean we always agree on everything?
We're going to talk about that a lot later on.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest question that comes in here is, are we keeping the unity? Ephesians 4, you know, we had these things here to keep the unity, to build up the body, and are we committed to working together? You know, you could jump into those meetings, you jump into those elderships. Are there tensions there? I mean, we are human beings. We'll interact with each other, and sometimes we may not always agree with each other, and sometimes those tensions build up and flow over into those meetings. And so that's probably our biggest challenge of having this conversation.
You mentioned the Ephesians 4 passage. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. Ephesians 4, verse 3, you know it. If I say the first word, you could say the rest of it. Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit, the bond of peace. Something struck me about that verse a couple of years ago. It's that little word keep. You know, we don't make the unity of the Spirit of the bond of peace. It was made when you were baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of sins. And everybody who's ever been baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of sins is brought into the unity of the Spirit. Whether we keep it or not is up to us. We get to decide. The word keep's interesting. It's the Greek word treo. I don't get into the Greek a whole lot because I don't think it's fair to show off Greek. So I don't like to do that. But it's an interesting word. It's used 70 times in your Bible. 8 of them are about keeping an object or watch over a person. Okay? So it's used in a passive verb. I know that's not a real phrase, but it's all right. Keep watch over this prisoner. Watch these donkeys. That's keep work. Okay, 70 times, 8 of them. 61 of them deal with keeping the faith, keeping the Word of God, keeping true to the commandments of God, 61 of them. That means there's one outlier of the 70 times it's used. You know what that one is? Right here in Ephesians 4. Keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. It's here's what's cool about this. A lot of our churches, and I applaud them in this, are committed to keeping true to the Word of God. If we don't do that, we're lost. But the same word is used to talk about keeping unity in the church. The same word. Do we put the same energy in staying united as a church that we put into keeping true to the Word of God? We need to. So, in our elderships, in every eldership, if the devil can divide an eldership, he's got the church. I believe the devil paints a target on the back of certain people. And I think elders are when he paints a target on. Because if he can get them, he's going to get a lot of other stuff. If he can get an eldership to fight each other, during COVID, the churches that did well in COVID were led by elders who were united. Not who always agreed about everything, but who decided we're going to stay together. The churches that struggled and are still struggling, most often the elders got at odds with each other. I've done a lot of study on the recovery from COVID. The ones that did the best had an eldership that was united. We're going to keep this church together. We're going to work together through it. There's going to be, God bless you if you're an elder. It didn't matter what you did during COVID, it was the wrong thing. Right? It didn't matter what you did. It didn't matter what decision you made, it was the wrong decision. Because there's going to be somebody going to be upset with you about it. But if the elders ever got at odds with each other, you had real trouble in churches. But when they stayed together, those churches recovered well. Okay, so keep the unity. The unity question, are we really going to work at staying together? We had a heated discussion last Tuesday night in the elders meeting. Do we still love each other? Can we still hug each other? Can we still laugh after this meeting's over? We're going to walk out of this meeting together, or we're going to walk out of this meeting, take it home, talk to our wives, and be more angry at each other. The next time we get together, there's more tension in that room. I'm sorry, John. I went on.
No,
Go ahead. Number two.
No, number two in there. The essential role clarity conversation. Do you know what your role is? And I know we're sitting here and we're in this leadership meeting. We've been talking about elders. Do you know what your role is? Do the deacons know what their role is? Do members know what their role is? And I know we may sit back and say, well, duh, you would think you would know that, but it may surprise you how many people, we kind of blend roles, we mix over roles and things like that. Are we being shepherds or are we being CEOs? We talked about that a little bit last night, of switching from this management to a shepherding style in here, but are we being overseers or are we just operational managers for the church building?
Yeah. So you asked the question, and you got to go deeper into it.
Oh, sure.
Do the members know what your role is? Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about this later in a later session about sometimes elders try to delegate, and if you've been a part of an eldership where the elders ran everything and didn't delegate any, and you decide we're going to start letting the deacons do what deacons should do, free us up so we can spend our time shepherding and praying and helping feed this flock, care for this flock, you're going to have members who are going to get upset because the deacons are, well, I remember we had a deacon over our lawn, which is kind of weird, but that was his job. He was to take care of the grounds. It was a deacon. And we had a member come to the elders, and she pointed her finger in one of the elders' faces in a meeting and said, "You aren't doing your job. You're supposed to be in charge of this." It's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know about that. So do the members know what the elder's role is? Do you know what? Remember that commercial? I don't know. It may have been Geico a few years ago. "Stay in your lane, bro." Remember that? That's one of my elders' favorite things to say to me when I was preaching at Spring Meadows. "Stay in your lane, bro." And I have to remember that. I have to remember what my role is. Do you know what your role is? That question. What is our role?
You know, you brought up deacons a second ago, and I think that may be some of the biggest challenges I've seen in my young life of growing up and being in the church. I'm going to call myself young still in here, is sometimes is that role congruency between eldership and deacons. Are we letting deacons be deacons? Do the deacons know what their role is and what permission they have to do things? And that may sound like, well, yeah, we think, we got somebody who's over education. Well, we need to go do it. Well, But are you still micromanaging that from a perspective of, no, you still can't do anything really, everything's still, and I understand that the elders have oversight and everything like this, but what freedom do they have? What boundaries do they have? Do you let them go and be deacons?
So, number 3, the end of tenure talk.
Ooh.
The end of tenure talk. So,
Ooh.
when should a man resign?
No one wants to answer that question.
I don't let people talk a lot. When do you think a man should resign? Here's what I see. Some people think that that an eldership is a lifetime appointment. That once you're in there, you have to serve till you die. And bless some guys' hearts, they're trying, and they are so ready to die. They just wish the Lord would take them, you know. I'm serious. I mean, you know, I've had members get upset because, yeah. Is there an age? A man could serve as a priest in the Old Testament until he was 70. Is that right? Yes, sir.
There's more than one way to die, though.
Yeah.
Use the Spirit to serve in that capacity.
Yes, sir.
That's something that
So, yeah.
we discussed with the group.
You know, there's more than one way to die. So you can die spiritually. 70? Well, man, I heard yesterday that 60 was a new 40. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. I know guys that are in their 90s that are as sharp as a whip. I know guys that are 60s aren't. Is it when they sin? So then, if that's the case, then every elder here's got to resign, right? Is it when their sin becomes so great that it's disturbing the unity of the church? I don't. The point I want to make is the Bible is not specific about this. So anytime elders rule, I hinted at this a few minutes. Elders rule in the realm of gray. Y'all don't rule in the realm of black and white, do you? God's already ruled there, right? So if God hasn't ruled, that's where you have authority. You don't have authority where God's ruled. God's got that authority. When my kids became Christians, before they became Christians, they did what I told them to do because I was their dad and I was in charge of them. I ruled everything. When they became Christians, suddenly they're Christians. They have to make their decisions. God rules in their life, and I rule in the realm of gray. So I rule in the realm of what time they'll be home at night. I didn't rule them whether they went to church or not. They had to go to church because they're Christians, right? God ruled in the realm of black and white. So you rule in the realm of gray. This is in the realm of gray. The Scriptures are not clear about when a man should step aside. There are different ways to do that. I know a church in Ohio that their rule is a man has to resign at age 75. That's the rule of their congregation. The elders agreed on that. And so at 75, a man steps aside. I know a church in Georgia that their rule is that a man can serve for 10 years. He has to step aside. That's the rule they've made in their congregation. So that's unscriptural. Well, it's all unscriptural because the Scriptures don't tell us what to do. So you've got to decide how we're going to do this. How many of you in this room, everybody gets to vote on this, have seen a man serve longer than he should serve? How many in this room have seen a man serve longer than he should serve? Almost every one of us have. And the whole church knew it, but there wasn't anything to do about it. So you better have a plan on the tenure issue. At Spring Meadows, and some of you aren't going to like me when I say this, our elders are appointed. They agree before they come on board to two things. One thing they agree on, if at any point the majority of the elders think he should resign, he'll resign without question. That's not a Bible rule. That's how they've decided they're going to do this. That's the way they can help a man step aside that needs to step aside. The other rule they have is so how do you appoint elders? Well, that gets interesting. We'll talk about that later. But the healthiest churches I've seen, the congregation is pretty heavily involved in that process. The healthiest churches I've seen. If there is a biblical way to do it, the preacher gets to do it, because that's the only biblical admonition we have on it. Paul told Timothy, Paul told Titus, I left you in Crete to appoint elders. So that's the only biblical one I have, but I don't think that's a model for us today. It may be, but I don't think it is. The other thing they have to agree on at Spring Meadows is, at the end of 3 years, you will let the congregation decide again if you serve. They serve a 3-year term. It's not a term limit thing. Into 3 years, the congregation says, all right, we think this man should continue to serve, or we think he shouldn't continue to serve. Now, you could do that. You could do that every Sunday. That's how a long preachers serve, isn't it? They serve Sunday to Sunday. Elijah, if you don't believe that's true, next Sunday, I got 2 lines I can give you. You're gone. Okay? We serve Sunday to Sunday. Our elders serve for 3 years. Into 3 years, they'll allow the congregation to evaluate whether they should continue to serve or not. We've never had a man that did not get reaffirmed. That's the word we use. But that's how we... But in your eldership, you probably should discuss this before it becomes a problem. We had a man who stepped aside after he had served for 12 years, 12 good years. I'm sorry, I'm talking way too much this morning.
I got my coffee. I'm good.
Okay, keep drinking. So he served for 12 years. His name was, I won't tell you his name, but he said, I'm slipping a little bit. And my wife recognized it, and I've recognized it. And I've served 4 3-year terms, and my new term's coming up now. And I want to step aside while I know I need to step aside. I don't want to keep serving to the point that I don't know I need to step aside. So he steps aside. We had a man in a church not far from Spring Hill that served as an elder for 50 years. His name was Clyde Farmer, 50 years. And his wife got dementia. And he didn't want anybody to know it. His wife was embarrassed, and she didn't want anybody to know it. He met with the elders and told them, and he cried, and he told them how much he loved them, and he'd served so well. And he got up Sunday morning, and he resigned. He told the elders before he was going to resign. He told them why. He said, I really don't want to say why I'm resigning. He said, I don't want to embarrass my wife. She doesn't want that to happen. So he got up Sunday morning, and he said, this morning I'm going to cease serving as an elder. He said, I love the preacher here. Craig's his name. I love the preacher here. He's one of my best friends. He's such a good preacher. He's a man of God. I love our other 2 elders. They're great elders. There's nothing going in my life that's sinful. I've served for 50 years, and it's time for me to step aside. The preacher, Craig, told me, I got 3 calls before supper that evening from people in the church. What's going on? You know, if a man can't step aside because he needs to step aside, you've got a little bit of a problem. So communicate to the church, here's how we do this. And here's our plan. Now, we can change that plan. It's not God's plan. God didn't tell us how to do this. But here's how we've decided to do it. If we decide a man served until 75 and we got a guy and he's still sharp at 75, we're going to make an issue. We're going to make an allowance here, let him keep serving for a couple more years. That's your business. But it's nice for the church to know, here's how we do this to keep people from having drama every time an elder steps aside. How many times you see drama when an elder steps aside? Everybody thinks something's going on, and nothing's going on most of the time. All right, tenure question.
Well, I think that story kind of points out to the question about tenure and about how long we serve is, I would challenge every elder in here to ask yourselves the question, what's going to remain after we're gone? If we step aside, what will remain? Because just as much as we don't put forth the pastoral situation in our churches where it's a person-driven church, where that personality is the one who drives that church, elderships can do that too, just as much as preachers can. And how many times you have seen it if a preacher leaves, all of a sudden that church has struggles because of that. Well, the same thing can happen with what you're saying is if an elder steps down, what happens to that congregation? And I think that's a question that I would challenge every elder in here, if you're going to participate about being an elder in the future, is what's going to happen after we're gone, after we step down? What will this church look like? What will it be? Is this a personality-driven congregation, or is this a principle-driven congregation by what we're trying to do and serve the Lord? So those would be some of my questions I would challenge people, especially asking this end of 10-year conversation to have in here.
Number 4.
Number 4, we talked a little bit about this last night, but kind of want to just briefly touch on it again. This is one of those things, shepherding versus managing conversation. You know, there is some management, Dale, that takes place in an eldership, that manages the church. And there is a sense in which that happens, but it can be blurred at times where we miss the shepherding side to that managing side in there.
So last night we talked about how to move from being a managing eldership to being a shepherding eldership, and you're right, there are some management aspects to it. One of the words even implies that. The bishop word implies some management, but the shepherding word is more the model that Jesus sets and that Peter talks about in 1 Peter chapter 5. But so when we talk about managing versus shepherding, this is a conversation. Last night we talked about the how-to. At some point, the eldership's going to have that conversation. At some point, who's going to be the Jim Davis in the room? Jim Davis, an elder that I served under. And Jim would regularly, in elders' meetings, this was years ago, he would regularly be the elder in the room, 5 elders. He'd be the elder in the room who would say, guys, what we're talking about right now is deacon's work. When you get back to talking about souls, who will be the Jim Davis in your room? There's a church, the Riverwood Church in Nashville, Riverwood Church of Christ in Nashville. Jim Bill McIntyre used to call it the Wood River Church. That's how he remembered it. So I remember how he remembered it. But Jim Bill, they had one of those rubber stress balls in their office. It's set in the middle of the table. And anytime they got too far afield, any elder could reach out there and grab that ball and throw it at another elder. I'm not advocating that. I don't know how that worked for them. But are you going to have a conversation at some point where you discuss, are we shepherding or are we managing? And then hold yourself to that.
I think the good question you and I were discussing is, ask yourselves the question, if today we lost our church building, does that shepherding culture still survive? Or is it just because we're inside a building? And I think that's one of the things. If it can survive, you know, you mentioned COVID a second ago. That really put a lot of challenges on elderships, especially. We were facing stuff we've never faced before and still trying to shepherd the flock.
Yeah, I had people calling me saying, you're older, which, you know, that's a good way to lose my friendship.
I've never called you older.
You're old, yeah. You're older. How do you deal with this? It's like, we've never dealt with this before. Nobody's dealt with this before. All right, number 5, the showing up conversation. Now, let's talk about this a little bit, because what I have noticed in most churches I have observed is the preacher typically has more influence in the church than anybody else. The eldership has more authority than anybody else. And those two can work against each other or with each other. But what I want to see happen is, when somebody goes to the hospital, I don't want them to call the preacher. Now, if as an elder you tell the preacher part of your job is to visit hospitals, you know what part of his job is? To visit hospitals. I have preachers, young preachers, some of you young preachers out there, I think. If I have young preachers call, elders have told me my job is to visit a hospital, my job is to preach the Word of God. And I say, well, now, if the elders tell you to visit a hospital, you ought to visit a hospital. Well, I work for God, I don't work for the elders. That's their favorite line. I always like to say, now, when God starts signing your paycheck, you work for God. But until then, you work for the elders, okay? I mean, I understand the mentality, I work for God. That sounds really nice. But I'm under the authority of the elders. And if the elders say, visit hospitals, I visit hospitals. But one of the reasons why, when there's a challenge in the church, the members take the side of the preacher instead of the elders, is because the preacher is the guy who showed up in their life. He's the guy who's been there when there's a birth or a death or a sickness. And so there comes conflict. Whose side he's going to take? They're going to take the side of the preacher. So how do you remedy that? Elders, start showing up at funerals. Start going to the hospital. Start being there before the preacher. We had a previous preacher's wife at the church that I preached at for a while. She was in her 80s, and her husband had been the preacher before me. And he was still alive. He wasn't working there anymore. Still a good man, godly man. She was a good woman. I was in my 30s at the time. She was in her 80s. And she would introduce herself as a preacher's wife. It seemed a little weird to me. It freaked a lot of people out. But she would race me to the hospital. So I never could get there before her. Start trying to be there before the preacher. Stay through the surgery. And I know some of you still work full time and your work schedule doesn't allow it. But when you can be there in people's lives, the best, John, I'm talking way too much today, but the best preachers in the church are not the guys who are great orators. I love to talk to everyday members and just ask them, who's your favorite preacher? The reason I keep hoping somebody's going to say my name, but it's never happened. But I like to, who's your favorite preacher? Inevitably, it's somebody I've never heard of or that I think's not that good a preacher. And I say, why? Well, when my dad died, he showed up at the hospital. He was there with us. When my son got arrested, he went down to prison and he sat with us while we worked through that. When I had a court appearance, he was there. When my wife got cancer, he came over the house and he prayed with us the day we found out about it. Preachers, you want your sermons to make more of an impact? You show up at the big moments in people's lives. And when you stand up on Sunday to preach, they're going to listen a whole lot better. Elders, you want to have greater impact in your congregation? Start showing up at the seminal moments in people's lives, and it'll make an impact.
I believe it was James, wasn't it? James chapter 5.
Something about calling for the elders.
If you're sick, you're supposed to call for the elders. You know, and that kind of goes back to that role congruency that we were talking about a second ago. Is we don't want pastors in our churches, quote, to lead the church, but yet we're treating our preachers like the pastor, and we want them to take that role. So, not that preachers shouldn't, as Dale was sitting there saying, and that may be part of the job description and things like that and fulfilling. We'll talk about that later today. But elders, leaders, take that role that you're supposed to do and lead.
Number 6, the 3% conversation. We talked about this last night. Are you being led? I think the first person I heard use this term was Mac Layton out of Oklahoma. Mac had a book he wrote on church growth, a really good book on church growth, in my opinion. And he talked about the vocal negative minority. If every time you make a decision based upon who's going to complain about it, you're not the elder. They are. Right? Well, you know, Sister Smith, she's going to really get upset if we do this. If every time you make a decision, you make it based upon what Sister Smith's going to do or say, Sister Smith's the elder in the church. You're no longer the elder. Don't be led by the vocal negative minority. Sometimes you just tell the vocal negative minority, we've decided we're going to do this. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. This is what we're going to do. This is what is best for this congregation. We're the shepherds here. We're in charge of this flock, and we're going to do this way. Now, don't be a jerk about it. But sometimes the vocal negative minority needs somebody to push back against them. They seem loud and they seem powerful. My experience is it doesn't matter what you're going to do, what you do, they're not going to leave. I mean, I know one eldership, they tried to get a lady to leave. They kept trying to make decisions so she'd leave. I won't call the eldership, but I know they were trying to get, because she was a problem in that church, and they talked to her, and she refused to change. And I thought they should withdraw from her. They didn't. But if the vocal negative minority is leading the church, you got a problem. So you've got to have a discussion at some point. Somebody's got to push back and say, yeah, I know Brother Jones isn't going to like it when we do this, but are we going to let Brother Jones lead this church, or are we going to lead this church?
Well, and the reality is,
conversation.
avoidance creates a slow decline within your leadership and your churches. That's what will happen. And sometimes it is discipline issues, which we don't like to talk a lot about in the church today, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it's getting into that mode. Sometimes it's addressing the sin, because the reality is, are elders supposed to be peacekeepers or peacemakers?
Yeah.
And so there's a difference in that. Dale and I serve on a board with about 8 other guys and one lady that's in this board who's our treasurer. And we send out surveys every year. And you're the one that has driven this home to us. We'll have 3,000 people there, and it's a great weekend. Everything has turned out great. And then we send the surveys out, and 2 people will say something negative about sang too long or ate or the food was terrible, whatever. And it will literally bring all of us down. And Dale has to remind us, 2 people out of 3,000 said something. And so sometimes you just got to put that back in there and put it in the back of the head and say, we're going to keep on going. But sometimes addressing those issues.
If I didn't get in trouble with number 3 when I talked about tenure and all, we're going to get in trouble with number 7, okay? So you ready for number 7?
That's why I'm letting you talk.
The unanimous consent discussion. At some point, you've got to discuss this. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I guarantee you there's some elderships in here that every decision you make has to be unanimous. I don't think that's wise. Now, are you united? You better be. We decided to develop a model, and here's how we decided to do it. As again, this is in the realm of gray. We decided that when the elders were divided on an issue, if they were divided down the middle, they would keep working on it and praying about it and thrashing out. But if they had 1 or 2 elders that hold out an eldership of 7 or 8 or an eldership of 4, and you got one that sees differently, that when they announced whatever the decision was to the congregation on some matter, they would say, now we voted about this, and the vote was 3-1. And usually they'd let the elder that was the dissenting voice make that statement. And I'm the elder that didn't agree with the rest of the elders. But I'm under the authority of the eldership, just like you are. Now you think about how that works, how that plays out. It does a lot of things. One, it lets that guy sitting out there that thinks, I must be an idiot because there's 7 elders, all 7 agreed on this, and I don't see it that way at all. I must be really bad off. But if 2 of the 7 elders felt differently, felt the same way he felt about it, he says, well, A, I'm not an idiot, and B, my opinion was represented in that room clearly. And I now know that. It didn't win the day, but it was represented well in there. And if the elders are united, somebody's going to, I'm going to go with that elder, I'm going to get on my side on this. No, you're not. I'm under the authority of the elders. As an elder, you are under the authority of the eldership. You got to live that way. So kind of think that through a little bit. If every decision has to be unanimous, you only need 1 elder, right? You don't need more than 1 elder. If every decision has to be unanimous, you only need 1 elder, because every decision is going to be the same way. So. And if you've got to be unanimous to make a decision, 1 elder that's a jerk, that's a bad word there, I know, but I don't know a better word to use, because it can hold the church hostage. We got 9 elders and 1's over here, and we got to be unanimous on everything. 8 think this way, this one thinks this way, and we're not going to do it because 1 thinks differently. Come on, people. The church is never going to go forward. And by that, I'm not talking about progressive stuff. Please, I hope you know that. I'm talking about things that will help the church in a positive way to grow and to prosper and to do well and to reach more people. But we can't do it because we got to be unanimous. That brother is the only elder. He's the only elder, because he's the one making every decision by keeping the others from making any decision. So kind of think that through. You've got to, and so that's why I say this is not, I'm not legislating. This is a discussion you need to have as an eldership. You need to talk this through as an eldership. to be healthy.
Where my youngest daughter attends in Madison, they have 26 elders.
Madison in Huntsville.
In Huntsville, in Huntsville, Alabama, they have 26 elders. I think is what
26 now.
Yeah. They just. I think they added 3 more recently in there.
27.
That's pretty close in there.
That one guy.
That one guy in there that had to follow in there. That was pretty good, Dale. I'm pretty proud of you. That was pretty quick. What are they, 1,200?
1,400.
1,400? 1,400. They have 2 services in there. So they had to adopt this. And her grandfather is an elder there. And I remember talking with him before at one time about it. And he said, it's a challenge. It was a challenge at first because of that unanimous consent, that mindset. Well, you're not going to be united on everything in there. Doctrinal, yes. We're not saying anything about that. But on decisions that there's gray area in there, you're going to have some.
You're not going to be united about everything doctrinal either. I wish you were.
Yeah.
I wish we could be. But if we've got to agree on everything that comes up doctrinally to remain in eldership, you won't remain in eldership long. I wish we could, but that's just reality. Go ahead.
Well, it is.
Number 8.
Number 8, the evaluation conversation. This is that conversation that takes place when you got to ask yourself the question, and are you willing to have the question, what can we do to be better?
Do we need to be better?
Do we need to be better? Can we do it? I remember being at a conference and heard some leaders of a congregation get up and talk, and he says they evaluate everything that they do from the eldership to the programs in the church about every year to find out, is this vital or is this not? You know, the typical, well, we did it 20 years ago, we might as well keep doing it, but it didn't work 20 years ago, but yet we're still going to try to force it as far as a program perspective. But even from an elder perspective, what can we do to reach the congregation better? How can we be better shepherds? How can we get into the lives of our people and ask that question?
Number 9, the preacher relationship conversation. We're going to talk at length about this in a little while, but it comes down to, are we on the same team or not? For about 20 years in my life, I have to admit, I was not on the same team as my elders. I saw them as my bosses and as them being the guys who would fuss at me if I made a mistake. And when I went from them being my bosses, who they still were, to us were working together for this congregation, it changed everything. So how are we going to treat our preacher? What are we going to expect out of him? How are we going to work with each other? Is he a part of the team, or are we going to put him on the bench? That's number 9. Go to number 10, John.
Number 10, the joy conversation. Do we enjoy being an elder? Do we enjoy being a shepherd? I think that's a fair question to ask ourselves. You know, do meetings drain us? Or do they give us life? Are we laughing together? Or do we look at this actually as a privilege here? You know, and I think, you know, the Hebrews 13 passage does come into play there. And leadership comes with challenges, but it also comes with great joy and blesses our lives if we let it.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes till we need to take a break.
You still got questions?
I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
John, what is a good ratio of elders to the flock?
Oh. I'm going to change that into a different way if I can. Does your eldership have the makeup of what your flock looks like? If that makes sense of what I'm asking. Far as an age, far as racial dynamic, far as all of these things, does your eldership look like your congregation? Far as that percentage, I don't know. That's a very good question to ask.
The number I've seen in leadership is about 40 to 1. I've seen that number as low as 25. I've seen as high as 60, but about 40 to 1 seems to be the general number of elders you need. If you got 400 people, you need 10 elders. That's the way you. Now, that's going to vary.
Sure.
Some churches have some super elders that are so good that they can shepherd more than that. But you do reach a tipping point where, all right, we're not able to do everything we need to do because we're stretched so thin. When we hit 600 at Spring Meadows at one point, we had 4 elders. We'd lost a couple, and a couple had moved away, and we were down to 4. And the elders just went before the church and said, we've got to have more elders. And some people think every man that's qualified should serve. I'm fine with that too, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. Some people think that you know, again, what I want to be careful about is the idea that a man has to be perfect to serve as an elder. I don't know how often I've heard eldership say, we just don't have anybody qualified. And I've seen churches that do that, where they don't have an eldership. And so when that happens, sometimes in my mind, I don't know, I'm not an elder, but in my mind, when I hear that, I'm thinking, what they're really saying to me is, a man has to be perfect to be an elder. And that's a problem. He doesn't have to be perfect. Now, not every man should serve as an elder. You've got to meet the qualifications. But again, some of those qualifications are a little bit subjective. All right, any advice? We got 3 minutes before we need to break. Any advice about meeting logistics for the best attendance and outcome meeting on Sunday versus during the week, or in person versus online, or time limits? I think it's talking about the elder meetings.
Oh, the elders meetings in there. I think that's one of those conversations. I would imagine that's one of those conversation pieces. Well, the church I mentioned last night that Paul works at in Atlanta, our friend Paul works at in Atlanta, they tried Zoom because of the elders working. It really didn't work for them. It didn't go over. It may work for your congregation to be able to sit there and do it because there was something that they were missing being together.
Through COVID, our elders never stopped meeting. They never
awesome.
met Zoom. They wanted to meet together. It was very healthy for them to be with other people and to sit face to face. I think some of it's got to be your question of what are we trying to accomplish in these meetings? And, some of it's got to be, I know an eldership in Brentwood, Tennessee, that they meet Wednesday night for supper before church. They meet 2 hours before church and they meet for supper. And they have 18 elders. It's another large church. They have 18 elders in that church. And they do elder pods, which I don't like, but that's how they do it. They have 3 elders over the youth program. They have 3 elders, and then they meet together. They report back on Wednesday night during that meeting. Our elders at Hamilton, Alabama, met at 5 o'clock on Sunday evening because they wanted their meetings not to last more than an hour. Mm-hmm. And services started at 6. So that's why they met then, and they were open about it. I wanted the meetings to last longer, but they didn't want them to last longer. And again, what's your purpose? We have the Spring Meadows elders. If there's an elder that can't meet with them, they move the time to meet. We had a man that said, I can't meet on Wednesday night. Okay, well, could you meet on Tuesday night? Yeah, I can meet on Tuesday night. Can everybody meet on Tuesday night? We meet on Tuesday night. Let's move the meetings to Tuesday night. Be accommodative. It doesn't have to be. I know an eldership down in Alabama that they made an eldership decision that the only binding decisions the elders can make were decisions made between 7:20 and 8 o'clock on Thursday night. That's the only binding time the elders can make a decision.
That's pretty narrow.
There's a lot of history behind that statement.
That's pretty narrow.
They had an elder in that church that would call elders meetings. He'd only invite the elders he knew would vote with him, and he'd have a meeting, and he'd make his decision. So the other elders said, aha, we got this figured out. So not a good way to do elders. Okay, we've got about 4 or 5 other questions that we'll answer later, but we need to take a break. Y'all been sitting too long. Thank you for your patience with us, and we'll break for 14 minutes and 30 seconds. 14 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll make it 10:15.